Good morning, everybody. It is another Tuesday. You know what that means. It's another episode of Breakfast with Bill, and we got the all-star cast back in action. Matt Rodgers here in studio with us. Gentlemen, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Evan. Good morning, Matt. Thanks for being back. Evan, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm excited to learn a little wrap-up from last week's episode, so I think we're going to knock it out of the park today, boys.
Well, a little continuation of selling into complex accounts, and it's always fun to try to manage people, right? It's like herding cats sometimes when we're selling into these complex accounts. So, Matt, I asked Matt to join me this morning and add some commentary. I feel more alive when I have you here with me and not talking just to the camera. So, thanks for being back. That's where you'd say thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Okay. So, as we talked about last week, it's important to establish value when we're selling into complex accounts. And it's critical that we remember and recognize that each person has different priorities. We talked about how engineering might have different needs than finance or legal or the executive team. And it's very important for us to understand the needs of each individual, what drives them, what's important to them, what they consider to be value. Because remember, when we're selling value, the complex the age-old question of selling value, and everybody wants to become a better value salesperson, and everybody thinks they know what value is, but we define value as that thing for which somebody's willing to pay. And just because we tell somebody it's important or we tell somebody there's value, it doesn't matter if they don't find it valuable enough to pay for it. So
Sure, and I think most of us, at least all of our clients, are selling in complex sales cycles, or at least multi-person, whether it be multi-decision making or at least influencing. I really think nowadays many organizations make decisions by committee. So I even wanted to take a step back. How do we figure out who's involved in the process? Because I think creating value is really important. But for many of us who are selling in complex sales cycles, whether we know it or not, it's really important to understand who is involved and get those people to the table, and then being able to start providing value once you know who's involved. So how do we do that?
yeah, so I think the easiest way to identify who's involved and then start to map out that account is asking somebody early on if we were to, what success look like, one of your favorite questions. If we were to start having some success here and the proposal looks good and makes sense, what happens next? Can you walk me through the process? And when we ask that question of somebody, it starts to reveal who's going to be involved, who's engaged in the decision process. And that's when you hear things like, I got to get with Larry. Okay, who's Larry? Well, Larry's in finance, and he has to approve everything over $5,000 or $50,000 or $500,000. And you say, okay, what's going to be important to Larry? And what's the last time you went to Larry with something like this? What were the questions he had? And okay, and then what? Well, once we get past Larry, then Sally gets involved. And Sally, she's a great girl. She's very supportive. All right, well, what's the one thing that would upset this with her? What's the one thing that she's going to be looking for? One thing questions, asking about that process. It'll illuminate for us who's involved and illuminate for us what's important to them.
And by the way, it is never too early to start talking about the process after proposal. If there's one thing that we found out probably over the last couple years, and we're big believers in, people don't necessarily know how to buy. We assume that they know how to buy, but us as salespeople, we know what happens next in our process because we do it daily. Unless it's something that they're buying every single day, oftentimes they don't know how to buy. And it's really critical and important not only for us to walk down that path for us to gain some information, but it helps clarify and cement and them walk through their own internal buying process, which is really important to keep urgency, to keep momentum, slowing it down a bit, like we say, to eventually speed it up. Because guess what? If Larry has to become involved and they don't find out until the 11th hour or fourth quarter in December, and we're trying to close strong Q4, it ends up coming out anyway. So it's really important that we ask those questions and help them figure out their own buying process.
Absolutely. And that's a great point that Matt makes, is it's never too early to understand that or start to identify that. And that goes back to sales as project management, right? The earlier we identify these key critical steps to the process and key critical participants in the process, the better, the more efficient that process is going to be, and the more predictable that outcome will be, right? Following back into our process. And as we start to map out that process and we start to identify those key players, I think it's critical early on that we start developing our value message around them. I'm involved in a sales cycle right now that's somewhat interesting because it's people that I know, it's people we've worked with, but there's one lead person who's kind of doing all the work with me and doing all the work internally. So he's carrying my water for me a little bit. But we have clear next steps established each week. We're continuously going back to who's involved, what's important, how do we craft that message. And we're building out components. As we build out his internal slide deck for his presentation, we're building each slide out with people in mind, knowing who's going to be involved in that process, knowing what's important to them, and knowing how we can start to identify those critical components, and so that messaging goes much more smoothly. We only know that because we started working on this early. From the very beginning, we said, here's something we'd like to do. Who's going to be involved and what's success going to look like? What's our launch date? We had all those steps figured out at the very beginning, much like we would in project management.
And one key point there, we pride ourselves at the Tallarico Group that we never coach or suggest or try to implement anything we don't do daily. We both continue to sell. And people often ask me, Matt, when do you fall off your sales process? It's when I know them. It's when I take shortcuts. It's when I don't get clear next steps. So for all of those out there that might be upselling or have to sell it again year after year, don't take shortcuts. Go through the process, cradle to grave every single time, because it's when you are comfortable, it's those people that you do know, that you have done business with, that are current clients, where it's really easy to slip up. So slow it down. Work the process. Process leads to predictable results, even when you know the person.
So when you say that, what's the one thing that throws you off most? If you had to put a term to the one thing that throws you off most in that process, is it familiarity?
Yeah, I would say so. I'd say being familiar, and I think clear next steps. Sometimes get in the realm of next steps every once in a while, because I know that they're going to pick up the phone, right? We've built that relationship, or they've showed me that pattern, whereas we've all had someone in selling that's always picked up the phone, and then you want to talk about that Larry, behind the scenes meets with Larry at the 11th hour, they go radio silent, and we never hear from them again.
And we can have a great relationship with them.
Yeah.
But they just either have bad news or no news to share.
Yep.
And we put them in that position of not wanting to get back to us. I'm going through this right now where I have somebody who I made a promise to, and I said, yeah, we'll support your cause. And there's no due date. There's no timeline out there. And I just don't have an answer for this individual. And we didn't have a clear next step established. I think we actually did, and I missed it. But where we had it, and I had to push it. And right now I have nothing to share, so I haven't got back to him. And I know that he's thinking, oh, this went bad, this went dead, this is a dead deal, whatever it might be. And it's not. I just don't have news for him yet.
And I think one thing on that, and particular client, we run into it all the time. And getting clear next steps is the single best thing that we can do in deals to keep momentum. Specific, time-bound, and show up on 2 calendars. The calendar part is really important. I think that's where sometimes people fall down, especially when we're in complex sales environments. There's other people involved, whether it's legal, procurement, engineering, we might not be able to get in front of. We're asking them questions, and we're asking them for feedback of others. So there's a time, elapsed time, and we ask them to come back with a clear next step in a week, 2 weeks. Maybe it's consistent. We set it on Wednesdays. It's okay to tell them, if you don't have new information, it's all right. Yeah. This is the best way for us to keep momentum, because I think oftentimes we do a really good job with clear next steps. There might be multiple in a row without new information. And as the prospect, they're thinking, I don't want to let Bill down, or I don't want another call of no news or no new information. So just wanted to make that point that it's okay to let them know.
Yeah, that's a
That's
great
right.
point. And giving somebody permission to come back without anything new, it's a great point. And it gives them that buy-in. Because otherwise, if somebody hasn't done what they said they were going to do or hasn't made progress, they might be embarrassed to come to that meeting. Where when you give them that permission, excuse me, when you give them that permission, letting them know it's okay to show up on Thursday with no new information, we still get to use that FaceTime with them. We still get to use that scheduled time with them to build our case, right? And say, hey, something else I was thinking about, or have you considered blank? You know, when they can't get in front of the person on their side.
Yeah, and any new information I should be aware about, because I think oftentimes prospects feel that they have to come back with a yes or no, where that could be great information. Well, you know, someone else was snooping around, or, you know, there potentially is another person in the RFP, or that's why it's so critical to have those clear next steps, because we can gain that information and diffuse those bombs in real time. You know, not getting that call, hey, we really loved you. We really wanted to go with you. We're going to keep you in mind, but you didn't win.
I just got butterflies when you said that, by the way, when you said there's someone new involved in the process, or, you know, someone new that's been snooping around, because we've all been there. And unfortunately, when we don't have clear next steps set, and when we don't have that communication going, that regular project management communication going, we find that out too late. We find that out at the decision time. I remember years ago, this had to be probably 8-9 years ago, there was another consultant out there that wanted to partner with us. And he came into the office and he was like, so tell me about some of the people you're working with, or he's, you know, talking about the way we engage. And I said, oh, we just want a new piece of business at ABC company. And he looked at me and he goes, for what? And I told him, he's like, I thought I was winning that. And he was so depressed. He had no idea that anybody else was even involved in the process, let alone that he lost. And it was because I don't think he had those clear next steps. He didn't understand the concept of managing the process as a project, you know, through that project management process. And sometimes, Matt, when we get everybody involved, when we start identifying who everybody's involved, you know, there's this concept of selling the veto, the very important top officer. Great book written about that. I think it was in the early 90s or late 80s. I'm really dating myself here, because when I asked Matt if he remembered that book, he was like, no. And I remember when it came out and people tell me, this is a great book. So selling the veto, very important top officer, said you go in at the top. You call the CEO, you call the CFO, you deal with them, and then, you know, you can work your way down. And that's a great concept. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could spend our days only talking to CEOs? But here in Realville, where sometimes I feel like the population's one, we can't do that, right? And sometimes here in Realville, we need to actually go in and work with somebody who might be an influencer or the user of what we're doing, and they have to sell and influence up for us. So that's another art, that's another skill set, right? Where when you go in with some of the users and they're going to sell up for you, we have to give them the materials they need. That's a great time to use those check-ins and those clear next steps that we established to ask them, coach them up through the process, coach them up on how to handle those people, ask them what materials and what messaging they might need internally. What can I do for you? What do you need from me? You know, all those types of questions that we actually are building the process and helping them establish some of that internal value messaging, and then continue to work with them and say, well, does it make sense for me to come to that meeting? Does it make sense for me and you to talk to Sally? Because we never want to just put that onus on having someone else do our job, outsourcing sales.
Yeah, and you stole that last point. Whenever someone says, hey, VP Vince is involved, or ultimately this will go to VP Vince's desk, I think salespeople are always quick to say, well, let me meet with VP Vince. When can I have a meeting with VP Vince? And the insulators, the information gatherers, the influencers, that's a threat to them, because it's their job to stiff arm you.
That's right.
So it's a phrase I guess I coined, but to burden them first a little bit with questions, right? What's one thing that's going to be important for VP Vince, and decisions like this in the past?
And that information, Matt, when you ask that question, that's good for you.
Yeah.
But it's, I think, more important for them, because many of the things you're asking them, they've never thought of.
Correct.
So they go into that meeting with Vince and they're like, when he asked some of them,
Yeah.
right? So how do we start asking them some of those questions, thinking forward so they can be better prepared for that conversation?
And like our buddy Ricky Matthews always says, help is only help when it looks like help.
That's right.
So I think we have to make it look like help, right?
Mhm.
Not in a manipulative way, a disingenuous way, but when we're asking some of those questions that are important to have a mutually beneficial partnership,
Mhm.
it's a lot easier for it to look like help and say, does it make sense that all three of us meet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here to help.
Yeah.
Right. We're here to help, and that's that servant selling heart. Right. The more we take into the world the attitude of helping another, versus getting our needs met or thinking our quota is their problem, the easier this goes, and the more we're able to engage in those type of conversations that sound and look like and hopefully feel like help to the individual on the other side. And you talk, Matt, too, about beating the process up with questions
Mm-hmm.
and not just assuming when somebody says, "Oh, it's an easy process, legal, no issues." We send it to legal and they sign off on it. Well, I know in my experience that doesn't happen too often, right? So it's important that we beat up on that process.
Great. How long do you think that process will take?
Mhm.
What's one thing that might trip that process up that you've seen in the past? To really ask those questions, because again, if it's project management, we're always preparing that if we go past that deadline, especially now, I looked at the calendar. What are there, like 8 selling weeks left, give or take a little bit? And so I know a lot of us have verbals out there and a lot of us want to finish strong. So it's especially important now. And now in Q4, using it as project management, starting to talk, hey, time is on our side now.
That's right.
Right? But I know in a couple weeks it's going to start getting tougher and tougher with vacations and the time of year. So absolutely you want to beat it up, especially when it comes to timing. Especially one thing, I love taking it negative. A lot of salespeople say, well, I had the verbal. We're feeling warm and fuzzy. We're hitting it off. Why would you take it negative? Because they're ultimately going to think about the one thing that would trip them up, the one reason why we wouldn't win that deal. So let's be there in person.
That's right.
And there's nothing wrong if they say, can't think of anything. You're going to get the business.
Yeah. And say, great, we hope that's the case. So look forward to helping you and talk it when's it make sense to catch up next week to check on progress and see what you might need from me. And we set our clear next step.
Mm-hmm.
And that clear next step maintains that momentum through the process for us, right? It continues to propel us and maintain that momentum. So remember, when we're starting with people that might not be the yes person, because most organizations have only very few yes people authorized, empowered to say yes. There's many no people. So we love to start with yes people. Sometimes we're involved with no people that only have the ability to say no. As Matt says, insulate us from the yes people. So when we're there, we have to be mindful of we're selling to them to sell to the next person. Don't become discouraged, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's still the process. And Matt also mentioned early in the quarter, here we sit in Q4 with roughly 8 selling weeks left, right? Because you got Christmas in there. So let's call it 7. So we have roughly 35 selling days left this year. 35 selling days. Here we sit in October thinking, life's grand. I'm going to have a great Q4. You have 35 selling days left to get to where you need to be. And how do we use each one of those days effectively? How do we use each one of those days to move our process forward? Tell you the things that get in the way. Matt mentioned one of them earlier, and that's familiarity. Another one is happy years.
Mm-hmm.
We start thinking we're hearing things that we want to hear, and it's easier. It's so much easier in the moment to let happy years rule the day and just walk away and be like, oh, they're happy, they love us, things are going to go well. Their legal takes 3 hours, they told me, right?
Yeah.
I can get something through legal in like 3 hours. Well, we know that's not the case. So why do we listen to that and walk away with that being okay? We have to challenge that in the moment. Happy years will kill a deal. And if we have happy years now, it seems easy to walk away. You know what's not easy? Looking at failure on December 30th.
Mm-hmm.
Standing there on December 30th knowing I'm not going to hit my number. Or standing there on December 30th knowing I'm not going to have the income I want in January because I didn't do everything I could in December. Be bold in that moment. be bold in that moment where you can ask a question and beat up on that process a little bit.
Well, and it's so much easier to be proactive in the moment, beat it up if using your language rather than chasing. Because once we leave that appointment, everyone thinks that they can get a clear next step. They can get momentum back. It's really tough once you leave to get clear next steps. It is. Your odds go down drastically. So clear next steps in the moment.
It's so tough to get a clear next step via email.
Oh,
right? I mean, because you walk away and somebody's busy, we're rushing a meeting, and this is where that project management comes in place, where if we know we have an hour with somebody and we look at it, we have to be mindful. I take notes on my laptop or my iPad. So I have a timer, the clock's up here for me and I can see what time it is. And I'm able to go through and I know that I got to start getting into wrap up somewhere around 12 minutes before the end of our time. 12, maybe 15 minutes, because that person might want to cut it short at the end of the hour, or we have to leave that ample time to get the clear next step set. And if we can't do that at 8:58, if we're meeting with somebody from 8 to 9, and 8:58 they're like, all right, hey, I got to run, I have another meeting.
Yeah, we're not running into the car yelling, hey, when do you want to meet again?
By the way, I'll send you an email as you're packing everything up. I'll send you an email and we'll set some time. It never works, right? That's why it's so critical that at 8:48 or 8:50, we're looking at them saying, hey, managing time, I have 3 things on my list I need to get to you. You're going to talk with Sally. When do you think it makes sense for us to get back together and review this and set it?
And we talk a lot about clear next steps, and the audience is, probably saying, what in the world is going on? If our clients, they hear that in their sleep. But clear next steps can single-handedly transform your career. If there's nothing that you take out of these other than clear next steps, it's worthwhile.
Yeah, and when we set those, we have great project management skills involved. We have that momentum that takes us through the process. And making sure that we're always asking those, those Columbo questions, and this is another reference. It's probably lost on my young friend, Matt, but go Google Columbo, great show. And how he used to always say, hey, one more thing. And we're trying to learn that process and just, openness, that natural curiosity of trying to understand what's going on in their organization, trying to understand not just what's important to them in the discovery process as we present solutions, but what's important to them, or what's the process they need to follow, and who do they need to incorporate.
And by the way, it's the most respectful thing we can do with their time.
That's right. That's right.
Ultimately respecting them. I'm going to follow up. Let's just get on each other's calendar so I can respect your time, because we don't need to play phone tag. I don't need to be, add another task to your list.
Because the last thing they really need to see is an email from me about, hey, catching up or following up. And that one
Hope
goes
you're
aside.
well.
Yeah, that one goes to the side. So managing that process is critical when we're inside of large organizations. It starts with understanding who's involved, what's important to them, understanding the value we create, but then also understand how do we get to a good outcome in a decision process, and we start mutually crafting those statements of work and those proposals together, right?
Yep.
All right. Well, I think that, managing in complex accounts and selling into complex accounts, it doesn't do it a whole lot of justice to cover it inside of 45 minutes over 2 weeks. But I think we laid down some of the foundations and some good ground rules. There's certainly much more to consider. If we can help you and you're selling into complex accounts, please reach out. We're happy to offer some advice, offer to answer any questions you might have. And a little reminder, a programming reminder, and I don't know if everybody knows, but there's an election going on. You probably haven't heard much about this in the news lately, but next Tuesday is Election Day. And in the spirit of Election Day and in the spirit of our patriotism, we're not going to have Breakfast with Bill next week, because I suspect I'll be standing in a line somewhere waiting to vote. Hopefully you all are too, unless you voted early. But next Tuesday, November 3rd, is Election Day. We're going to take our first day off since we started this. We'll be back the following week, November 10th, and we'll have a topic coming out on social media for then. You also might notice I'm wearing pink again as we wind up October. Another gentle reminder about being aware of breast cancer and the devastation it's brought to so many that we love, but also the hope that's on the horizon for a cure, and a gentle reminder and call for us to be able to support that awareness and cause for the cure. So, Matt, thanks for being back.
Thanks for
Anything that
having me.
I forgot?
No, I think we're good.
All right, buddy. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Always appreciated. Look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks on November 10th. And till then, take care. God bless, and we'll see you soon.